Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Bold, Beautiful Borderline podcast. It's your host, Sarah, and Talon is here today. Probably not surprising. And we have a really important episode. This podcast has often gotten political because mental health is political, and it shouldn't be, but because of the lack of access and representation, it is often political. And so what has happened in the last week or so that we would possibly be talking for an entire episode about medication stigma?
Are you asking rhetorically, or are you asking me to answer the question?
I'm asking you to answer the question.
What's his name? And Elon Musk think that, what are they called? SSRIs or whatever, or addictive. They're making people, I don't know.
I got a phone call.
Cute. I don't know. I don't know what all they've been saying because I've been kind of avoiding reading the news. But basically, that I did see a headline that said, like, they think SSRIs are addictive and habit forming and all these things and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure they probably think that they make you worse off, I would imagine. And I think that's just like a basic lack of understanding in what an SSRI is, what they do, and who takes them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
So good Spark Notes.
Thanks.
We're going to zoom in or zoom out a little bit. I'm going to add some things. So RFK Jr.
Yeah, that guy.
Who is now the head of the HHS. I can't remember exactly what the acronym title is that he has been given, although what an interesting confirmation hearing question and answer period that I watched. But we love Bernie and Elizabeth Warren.
Mm-hmm.
God bless them.
Yeah.
So RFK is he's not supportive of not just SSRIs, but psychotropic medications, which includes SSRIs, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety meds. What else? There's something else in there. And so one of the terrifying statements he has made is not only is heroin easier to habit kick than these medications, but that there is a possibility that he will essentially make them go away, and has also made statements indicating that people who are on these medications can go to work camps that he will be building in order to get off of these medications, which I don't want to be fear-mongering on this podcast. I think there's a lot of fact-checking we can do. None of this is happening right now. None of this may happen. But it speaks to the severe danger that stigma around medication use has. And I am partial to the borderline community, of course. Like, this is a community of people I love so much, and people whose symptoms present in similar ways or have similar experiences. But of course, just all my folks living with mental health disorders or symptoms or whatever we want to call it, anyone who is using this medication, I am certain is experiencing anger and fear and all of these things. But I know specific to our community, many people feel like without their medications, even if they have really strong skills use and really strong supports, that they would be unsafe. And I feel that way too. And so it's important that we do some fact checking around that. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what would get caught up in the courts, even if something tried to happen. We don't know what is involved in insurance and not involved in insurance and all of these things. we do know that, put your hand down. We do know that there are doctors and psychiatrists who will fight like hell. There are states that will fight like hell. And so my initial reaction was like, well, fuck, we got to get out of the country if that's the case. But coming back to the present moment, again, we don't know what's happening. The level of distress that this is causing is real, and try to stay in this moment.
I have a thought.
Okay.
That's why I raised my hand, because I didn't want to lose it. Also, we have to consider, like, we live in like a capitalist society, right? And we can't discount big pharma's stake in SSRIs and prescribing meds, and like, so there is not so much a protection, but like somebody saying like, I'm going to get rid of billions of dollars of revenue through SSRIs, stimulants, and things like that this country does take.
That's a good point.
They're not like,
yeah, they don't want to lose that money.
no.
I mean, they don't care so much about our health.
No. They just don't want
there are people that work in the pharmaceutical industry that do in fact care about our health.
Sure,
but you're right. I mean, they don't want to lose the income that has to do with that.
And that's a really big revenue stream when we think about how common.
Yeah, and I mean, how many decisions come back to money?
Right, 100%. So, like, there is that. Like, even if you don't believe that people will protect us, which, like, that's kind of the camp I'm in, logically, we live in a society that is controlled by companies and their bottom line.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, are multiple pharmaceutical companies going to be like, actually, we totally support you getting rid of one of our products completely, no more, bye-bye. And putting all the people who buy those products, take those products, use those products in work camps, they're no longer, now they're no longer somebody who I can make money off of.
Yeah. Which is like so problematic.
Yes.
You know, like I hate that is like a sort of saving grace, because like, is this a product or is this a life-saving tool? It's a life-saving tool, but
right. It's a life-saving tool, right? Like, it's a life-saving tool that is produced that we are forced to purchase because universal healthcare is not a basic human right, right?
Sure.
And I feel horrible that that's what's getting me to sleep at night. Like, big pharma's bottom line will save us, but like, it could.
Why didn't you tell me this before if this is getting you to sleep at night? I was up at 4 a.m., motherfucker.
I just thought of it this morning while I was at work. I was like,
you're like, I'm going to sleep better tonight.
Knowing, but like, and again, like Sarah said, nothing's guaranteed. Even what I just said is not guaranteed, but logically it's so easy, like, to just run away with our fear.
Yeah.
Because it is scary. And I'm not downplaying any of it. Like, it is horrible. Like, pit in your stomach. It is. So I don't, hopefully maybe that helps some of you guys, some of you tonight. I don't know. But
yeah.
But no, yeah, everything you just said. Yeah. I just didn't want to lose my thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're with you guys, and I am scared, and I'm really working to remain hopeful. And I think it's really important that we educate people. So my guess is that like most of the folks with borderline listening don't need to like be quote unquote educated or listen to a podcast about med stigma, why it exists, all of that. But I also know so many people listening are family, friends, fucking teachers, other therapists. Like, I know a lot of people who are listening who would benefit from this dialogue. So let's get into it. The first like major reason for medication stigma, particularly psychotropic medication stigma, is this kind of like cultural or like societal belief that we haven't worked hard enough, right? That like taking medication is sort of like giving in instead of choosing. Yeah, feeding.
Instead
of like using your coping skills. um, which is just bananas because you can't cope through psychosis.
Yeah.
Like you can't cope through a lot of the symptoms that come with mental health. You can cope with a lot of symptoms that come from mental health, but sometimes you can't cope until you're properly medicated
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes this is just brain stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not environmental and trauma and whatever. Sometimes those things can trigger disorders and symptoms, but not always will that be the cause of a mental health condition. And many mental health conditions, the number one treatment before coping is medication management. So that belief in sort of like willpower instead of needing treatment is damaging but devastating, because then it assumes that you're not strong enough or you don't have enough morals and values. And the truth is, like, some people don't have the resources for some of those things.
Yeah. Well, it feeds into that like thought of like, you didn't try hard enough. You're a failure, right? Which I think so many people with like mental health disorders already feel that they're failing
Yeah.
in life. Like, why can't I just get out of bed? Why can't I just do the thing I have to do? You know, why does my brain behave this way? So there's all of these things like, that I ask myself, you know, when I'm not living up to what I understand the status quo to be, and be like, I should be able to do these things. And it's really hard to say I can't, because people will say, well, oh yeah, you can, you're just not trying hard enough. And it's so like that whole, like, you know, like you said, willpower over treatment, it doesn't
It
doesn't
doesn't
work like
work.
that. It doesn't work like that.
What do the kids say? The math ain't mathin'.
Yeah.
God. Oh, I hate hearing myself say that. But like, I mean, like, you literally cannot
Mm-mm.
stop the brain from being overstimulated. You can take some of the things off your wall and like clean as much as you want, but sometimes the brain literally is just like, oh, okay, well, you took everything off the wall. Now I'm understimulated and I'm freaking out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah, it's
therapy doesn't fix that.
no. And I mean, therapy helps you like develop coping skills and like your ability to like talk about and express and be like, okay, this is how I'm feeling because of this. Okay, great. Yeah, awesome.
But how many years does it take to get there? And how many relationships have we damaged? And how many of us have experienced profound shame and self-hate and suicide attempts and all of these like addictions and all of these things that could have been prevented by proper treatment?
100%. Like, it's countless, right? Like that's the whole thing. And med stigma is one of the, I think, largest reasons that like a lot of us don't get medicated. And it's not even your own internalized med stigma, right? Yeah. I mean, yeah. You know, it's not even your own internalized med stigma. It's like parents or guardians, their own med stigma that comes out, and maybe you heard them talk about, you know, your depressed aunt one time, you know, whatever. And now you're like,
The church.
yeah, the church, like there's so many things just socially. And then to turn around and then there's misrepresentation and misinformation in the media, and there's all of these things, and it just piles into this one big rock of I can't get medicated, I won't get medicated, I don't need to get medicated, I'm better than that, I'm stronger than that, I'm above it. And it's like, well, that's not like it's not a ladder system.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, there's so much I could say about that, but I mean, it all comes back to the same sort of stuff. The next is like misinformation and media representation. That good old fake news, baby.
Good old fake news.
I mean, this is literally RFK is saying he has watched people have a more he has watched people in his own family, which I'm sure they loved that, but just like people overall, meaning a large cohort of people, when you say that, have a harder time getting off of heroin and opiates than antidepressants. And
That's literally the most untrue thing I've ever heard and seen.
yeah, there was a couple psychiatrists who reviewed this who basically said exactly that. One psychiatrist said, I have seen maybe 2 or 3 people in my career that was spanning a couple of decades that have had a harder time getting off of a psychotropic medication than they did heroin. 2 people compared to like the number of people you would treat over
Several times.
20 years, 15 years, 30 years. I mean, like, to me, as someone who really loves science, it doesn't make sense to not read the science. So I have a really hard time sort of like meeting people where they're at in that belief, or not even just like that belief, but the belief overall that like people get sort of like hooked on medications, or they're going to feel more numb than they feel whatever. It's like, yeah, there are some people, but compared to the overall cohort of folks that are using these medications, that's just not even untrue, but it's like, it's so untrue that it's bananas.
Yeah, you said one time to somebody, because they were talking about how they didn't want to take their meds because they felt numb. And I remember you said this, and I never really heard anybody say this before. It makes sense that you would say this because, you do have a therapist hat. But you said, are you numb, or are you feeling the appropriate level of that emotion at that time?
Well, I didn't even just say that.
What
First,
did you say? Like you said,
I said that.
Yeah.
Oh, I said that. But first, I said to that person, in the last week, can you tell me if you felt happy? Yes. In the last week, can you tell me if you felt sad? Yes. In the last week, can you tell me if you felt nervous, angry, excited? And they said yes to all of those things. And that's when I said, so are you numb, or are you just feeling these in less of an extreme way that you're unfamiliar with?
Yeah. And you're not recognizing it because your brain is only used to the really, really big one or nothing. And you can't identify the middle here.
Right.
Yeah. And they were like,
Well, not even like nothing, but like the really big one. And then the like, it's so bad, I can't live.
yeah, there you go. There you go. That's a better. Yeah. But you can't recognize the middle ground. And then they were like, oh. And so that's med stigma. That is like, that like med stigma. I think I do believe that sometimes that's just what you think. And so you don't even look deeper because you're like, oh, that's what it is. And it's like, well, am I numb, or am I just
right?
Am I leveled out? Like, am I at like a decent?
And again, that's not to say that there aren't people that do in fact experience numbness.
No.
And I have met people who were over medicated.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people I've met who are over medicated had an intellectual and developmental disability that, when married with a serious mental illness, made the symptoms very difficult to control,
right,
or problematic in their ability to keep themselves and other people safe. I still don't believe that that was an appropriate amount of medication. But there are people who are, 1, over medicated, or 2, are experiencing the side effect of a sort of like emotional numbness.
Yeah.
But when we look at the mass
overall,
if we look at the overall cohort of folks using these medications, that is very, very, very small.
Great.
Huge misinformation there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, negative portrayal in the media. in terms of like movies and television and such, I think that there is this like the numbness stuff, but then also like I took the wrong medication and it made me psychotic, or I took so many of my medication and X, Y, and Z happened, or like, I don't know. I can't even remember the last time I saw a movie like that because I try to avoid movies that have anything to do with mental health. But
Yeah.
I know for certain that movies and books play a big role in all of our perspectives about anything, not just mental health.
Yeah. I find like with movies and TV and all that, sometimes it's not even I wish I could think of a few movies, but what I've noticed is like
What's that old Gone Girl?
What?
Gone Girl. The movie, the book?
Girl Interrupted?
Girl Interrupted.
Girl Interrupted. No, yeah, Gone Girl is
not Gone Girl. Girl Interrupted. Isn't that a pretty good example of like the over dramatization?
Well, so,
or am I wrong?
Well, okay. So
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
So the book is a memoir by a woman named Susanna Kaysen. Like she's real. She's a real human. I can't remember if I haven't read Gone Girl in
Girl Interrupted.
I haven't read Girl Interrupted in about 15 years. I have it on my shelf. I can't remember if it's a memoir or a novel. I can't remember but she did.
But I'm talking about the movie, right?
The movie is a good example of an over dramatization when it comes to like, so the girls in there are always tonguing their meds, pretending to take them.
Right.
And then they don't take them and then, whatever.
Which does happen in inpatient psychiatric facilities, but not to that extent of like,
and they're like,
everyone's doing that. Like,
and they're like swapping meds and like there's a big pill trade and all this stuff.
Want to get better.
Yeah. And so they're doing that actually, in that movie, she is diagnosed with borderline personality disorder.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So
maybe that wasn't a very good example, but nonetheless, what I feel like is that people who are, in charge of creating media, whether that's TikTok or a trilogy or a fucking $50 million movie production, have the ethical responsibility to be accurate.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
How often, I mean, I think it's happening more and more, but how often are we consulting on people with lived experience? Probably not very often.
No. What I was going to say is, like, I feel like oftentimes if you see, like, antidepressants are always the one that's talked about in a movie or TV show. And again, I wish I had actual examples, but my feeling and thought is always, like, if you're seeing somebody take them, they always end up, like, they go crackers, or nanners. And then they're like, oh, well, she was taking all of her antidepressants and she was drinking. And it always, the theme or the feeling always seems like, oh, well, it was the antidepressants. And it's like, well, no, it was because she was getting trashed on antidepressants in the middle of with her antidepressants, right? She was drinking 2 bottles of wine, on her Prozac. Like, man, but it always felt like they were making it the antidepressants or the SSRI's fault, when really it's like, and we never talk about like overusage of alcohol in media, but that's not the point.
That's a good point. Also, like the drug interaction with marijuana and medication, I'm not familiar with that so much, but I should probably get familiar with it.
But yeah, but it always seems like in the media, TV shows, it's like super taboo, even in the TV show. It's never like normalized in TV. It's always like, yeah, she had to go to. She had to go to, they always say, she had to go to the hospital. She had to, she got taken away or whatever. In American Beauty, the boy says, oh yeah, he got into a fight at school and his parents basically put him into a mental institution for a year, drugged him up and left him there. That's and that's all that's said about it. But what is, drugged him up, left him there.
Well, and I think medication stigma really can be born of parents not forcing, but sort of like very heavily encouraging or enrolling children in therapy and medication management without their consent.
Mm-hmm.
That's like one of the most damaging things you can do is tell a teenager they have to do this
Mm-hmm.
because it makes them never want to go back and try it
Yeah,
as an adult.
that makes sense.
And this is one of the things where I'm like, I don't provide court mandated therapy, and I don't provide therapy even when a child is like legally needs their parents' permission
Mm-hmm.
to attend therapy if they don't want to.
Yeah.
And I just had a really great experience with a parent where I explained that, and I was like, we've done some really good work for however long, and they don't want to come anymore. And what I would really like to do is like you to practice respecting that and then call me in 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to try therapy again in 90 days, let's do that. And the mom was wonderful. Mom was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Like, so.
Yeah, I mean, we have to give kids their own agency. And then, my experience was, like, the complete opposite. Like, as a teenager, as a kid, I probably should have, therapy should have been suggested to me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And, when I attempted to suggest it, to my parent, it was very, no. I was like, oh. Okay.
Well, and back then you didn't have like therapists at school you could see. I love that kids can access like actual legitimate therapists at school now that are not not required for the families to provide the funding.
Yeah.
It's so fabulous.
I mean, I did go to one counseling session with my parent. And I was just like,
well, that was probably a nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That was rough.
So media representation, these beliefs that people's personalities will drastically change, or there will be extreme side effects and all of these things. And again, people are going to have reactions to medications sometimes. Like I had a awful reaction to prednisone. Like it doesn't really matter what type of medication it is. There's always a risk of a negative response or a really great response. That's just kind of the risk that that's the roll of the dice.
My
say.
Therapist always said there's a general rule. It's not for everything, but a third of people do really well, have very little to no side effects. They have good actual effects, a good impact. A third of people do middle of the road, they got some side effects. It's kind of working for them, and okay, great, whatever. And then there is a third of people who do not do well on a certain medication, and they have horrible side effects, or it doesn't do anything for them. And
I think that's a little over dramatized.
Yes,
that's an over dramatization
generally. But she said that doesn't mean that you don't try another med just because one didn't work for you. She's like, that just means that that's not the one for you.
Correct.
And
I know a lot of people who have tried a lot of different meds, and that is one of the shitty parts about if you want to try medication management, you have to be prepared that there's going to be, a couple of meds sometimes before you find the right one. Or I'm on a lot of medication, and it's not just lithium, and it's not just X, Y, and Z. I'm on quite a bit of medication, and I'm not numb.
No.
I would love to be a little bit more numb. You know what I mean? It's almost like sugar caps instead of lithium, but I digress.
You're feeling better though. When we adjusted, you got everything adjusted, you're feeling better, so you even had to readjust after years of being on, kind of the same stuff, with your sertraline and stuff.
Yeah.
We had to way readjust. So
I am realizing that sertraline really never was the right medication for me, and I didn't realize because a lot of the changes were about getting sober.
Yeah.
And so once I was a while into my sobriety, it's going to be 3 years this September, and things sort of stabled out and I had a new baseline and a new understanding of myself, it was kind of like, oh, this medication isn't doing anything for me. And I am almost off of SSRIs, and I won't take another SSRI or SNRI because like what I really need is the mood stabilizers, and the anti-anxiety medication. But I mean, I think that's important for people to know about as they make an informed choice about medication management. Be prepared maybe to have to try a couple, but there's genetic testing now that never existed back in the day that's like so amazing, where you are given like red, yellow, green, and like in the green, these are the medications that are most likely to help you, and red, avoid these ones based on your genetics. And it's so cool. So
cool.
I love that.
That's a really great tool.
If only RFK knew about that. Okay.
I don't even think he can read, honestly. I
don't think that's fair.
I don't think his reading comprehension is where he thinks it is. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Our own personal internalized stigma. So the belief that if we take medication, we are broken, or we have to feel shame based on whatever communities we're in. So maybe you're in a religious or cultural or racial community, or like you were raised in areas where medication use for your mental health was not only like not discussed, but not like was discouraged. And so that can breed our own internalized stigma, which is dangerous because it really comes back to like keeping us safe, but also like how many years of our lives could we have been slightly happier and slightly healthier? Like I would have retained relationships that meant so much to me. And I was always going to be an addict, but maybe I wouldn't have made all of the choices that were so damaging. Maybe I could have maintained a middle of the road addict status and still be able to drink on the weekends right now. I'm lying.
I don't think so.
I'm lying.
But maybe stuff wouldn't have been so chaotic, you know? Like maybe it would have, you know, maybe things would have worked out a little bit differently. Like obviously, like as we get older, like we do change and relationships that we had don't fit anymore, and that's okay. But maybe some of them would have stuck for you, and maybe not. Who knows?
I know that there would have been some that would have stuck.
I'm sure.
If I could have been healthier. But, you know, we also have to choose healthy people to be in relationships with, whether that's like platonic or intimate. Fear of addiction is another internalized stigma, or like not even fear of addiction, but fear of like dependence. Like I'll have to be on this the rest of my life sort of thing. And I think that's not true for the vast majority of people who use SSRIs or other SNRIs, maybe even mood stabilizers.
Yeah.
I personally want to be on these medications for the rest of my life. Unless something dramatically changes, I don't want to hurt, and I don't want to ride the roller coaster that I rode. I wouldn't be able to sustain my career. I don't think we would be able to sustain our marriage.
If you were unmedicated?
If I was unmedicated.
No, I don't think we would.
Yeah.
I was just trying to find a nice way to...
Oh, you don't have to say that in a nice way. Yeah. That's my experience. It's not everybody else's.
No. But yeah, I don't know that we would be able to sustain our marriage. And if we did sustain our marriage, it would not...
Well, I would break up with you.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I'd want to get back together, and then I'd break up, and then, you know, all that junk.
Yeah.
So like another example of like how hating ourselves for having to quote unquote having to or benefiting from using meds is just hurting us. Employment, health, relationships, sleep, ability to enjoy our hobbies or even develop hobbies, ability to like be a good dog mom. Like I was not a good dog mom when I was younger. So, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, couple ways to reduce stigma.
Okay. Normalize medication as part of mental health care. Just like taking insulin for diabetes.
I hate that example. It's always the example that's used,
like
but
that.
It's a good one.
I like that. I know you wish it wasn't so like a trope, I guess maybe, but like I like that. That's a very like
I've just heard so many people say like, well, if you were a diabetic when you take insulin, it's like, yeah, I know.
yeah, right. Yeah.
But I mean, that's my own internalized stigma of having felt like people were,
Forcing you to do something.
yes, it is a good example.
I like it. I'm over here like that's a great example. For me, I like it because it's tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because like in my brain, I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Insulin helps symptoms of diabetes.
Yep.
Great. Like, I think that's a great example.
Regulates your blood sugar.
Your blood sugar. Yep.
And I need to just regulate my emotion.
Right. There you go.
The next is to encourage conversation about medication for mental health. So, like, if you are feeling safe with a group of people or a person who made a negative comment, if you feel safe to give feedback, if you feel safe to say, like, that hurts my feelings as someone using this medication who's having really good outcomes, or just giving like a little bit of like statistics maybe or factual information about these medications, maybe even just giving the insulin and being diabetic example. But like every time that we're willing to challenge something kindly for a person who's experiencing stigma and perpetuating stigma, then maybe we make a tiny, tiny, tiny dent in something that needs to be dented.
I was loving how kind and constructive you were and the feedback, the fake feedback you were just giving. I was like, oh, dang.
Well, I spent enough years like screaming at people at parties for using like inappropriate slurs against queer people, and I realized that never worked.
No, it just makes you look unhinged.
Yeah, and actually like and actually then that like results in people doubling down.
Yep. Yeah, because they feel attacked and then they're defensive and yeah. And then nobody wants to like
Well, not only that, but like if I had like flipped out on someone at a party back in the day when I wasn't like skillful and whatever, then they would assume that all queer people were like me.
right.
Which isn't fair.
Well,
So, but just perpetuates that stigma.
sure.
And then very last is, like us sort of taking back our own agency and celebrating being on medication and taking steps in our lives that helps us live a life where we can experience more joy and feel more stability and whatever. And that used to be something that I was like terrified about, of talking about, on Instagram or with my family or whoever. Not that I really talk to my family about it very often, but there have been times where I've texted my mom and said like, hey, I'm going through a med change. Maybe don't text me for a couple of days, anything important.
Yeah.
That was helpful for me in supporting myself, but also just like normalizing that this is something that's an important tool for your daughter to use.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that it says like that, like medication is a choice, like it is a choice, and that it's not the end all be all of a cure. Like you still like, if you choose to be on meds, then, you do need someone helping you manage meds, and like you ideally I think should be like in therapy if therapy is necessary. And I also do think that like, when you are in therapy and maybe you do decide to get on meds, then other lifestyle changes can come more easily, like
Yeah.
changes you want to make.
Yep.
You know, and that also will impact like your need for or the amount of meds maybe that you're on, because
Once you develop those habits, maybe you don't need the medication anymore.
yeah,
It's such a
a lower
dose
dose
or whatever.
Yeah, I think I like that a lot. Because yeah, I think that it's very black and white. A lot of people who don't understand what meds do, and they don't fix you. They don't change how you feel inside.
I mean, yeah, they do though. They've reduced some of the feelings.
Yes, but like some of those feelings are still there, right? Like
Yeah, you can't expect everything to go away.
that's what I mean. Like you don't, and that's what I mean by black and white. It's not 0 or 100. Like meds just get you to a nice like middle ground and get rid of some stuff, and then make other things that won't go away more manageable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's another thing, is having realistic expectations with taking meds too.
Yeah.
It's not just you're not gonna wake up tomorrow and be like, yes. You might wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, all right.
Yeah, you might wake up tomorrow with a headache, but
Also,
generally in about 4 to 6 weeks, that goes away.
but, like just like going back to like having some gray area around this, I think also helps get rid of stigma. Just like there are two sides to every coin.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of in between when that coin is flipping in the air, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just a little bit of advice before I sign us off. If you are considering taking meds, try it for real. Take them every day and take them for like 3 months and really give it a chance to see, because who knows how much of the stigma might still be there if you do in fact give it a real shot.
Yeah.
And then if you are choosing to not take meds, which is awesome and absolutely your choice, try not to perpetuate the stigma by saying, I don't want to take medication because I don't want to be numb. Try to make a statement that won't scare other people. Like, it's okay if that's what your feelings and your thoughts and your beliefs are, but I think it's also helpful for other people to just hear you say, like, yeah, for me, I just don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's usually what I've always said back in the day when I wasn't like wanting or willing to like try. But it's like, I'm just not in the place to do that. Like that feels like a lot for me.
Yeah, I'm not ready yet.
To take on.
Or I'm never going to be ready. And that's okay too. But yeah, just trying not to perpetuate that stigma for someone who's maybe listening and considering something themselves.
Yeah.
So, all right, y'all, we are signing off, but try to avoid the news if you can at times.
Take a break.
Have a very strong self-care plan for your life right now, and hold on to your people and just practice the fact-checking. We don't know what's happening. And so returning to the present moment, which right now I'm just rocking myself back and forth and getting ready to go back to work.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.